Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given Brexit and our vital red line on the European Court and the repeal of the 1972 Act, would my right honourable friend agree that a reasonable framework to protect reciprocal citizens' rights whilst making no concession at all on preserving our own Westminster jurisdiction and our own judicial sovereignty would be a tribunal system such as I outlined in the House last week, which would be along lines similar to the EFTA Court and a parallel source of law agreement?
My honourable friend raises an interesting proposal, and of course we're looking at a variety of arrangements for the enforcement of agreements that we come to. In relation to the EU citizens' rights, if these form part of the withdrawal treaty, they will be enshrined in international law. But also, I think that we should recognise that our courts are world-renowned. They are respected around the world. And what I want to see and would expect is that these citizens' rights for EU citizens in the UK would be upheld and enforced by our courts in the same way as UK citizens' rights are upheld and enforced by our courts.
Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your forbearance, if I can just make some short remarks on the sad passing of Gordon Wilson, who was Member of Parliament for Dundee East from 1974 to 1987. I'm sure everyone in the House would wish to pass their condolences to Gordon's family. Those of us in these benches were honoured to have the wisdom, wit and intelligence of Gordon with us for many, many decades. Indeed, he spoke with me on Wednesday before I entered the chamber to respond to the Queen's speech. You'll be sadly missed by all of us, in particular by those of us in these benches. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of the Government's plan for EU citizens. It was more than concerning to open a document designed to settle the lives of many of our EU citizens here to discover that it leaves many more questions than it does answers. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister went to Brussels last week and presented a plan for EU nationals. It fell short of expectations, with Dutch President Mark Rutte stating there are thousands of questions to ask about the proposal. Will the Prime Minister confirm that the Joint Ministerial Committee was consulted on the proposal she has published today? When will she honour the pledge of a United Kingdom approach to Brexit and give Scotland a place at the table in negotiations? Has the Prime Minister costed her plan for EU nationals, which she presented to the EU27 last week, and when will the costings be laid before the House? Will she confirm that EU citizens in Scotland will not have to fill out the 85-page paper form for residency? In the early hours after the EU referendum result, Scotland's First Minister called loud and clear for the Prime Minister to unilaterally guarantee EU citizens' rights. It is therefore shocking to learn in the Evening Standard that the then Prime Minister had pledged just to do that, but the current Prime Minister blocked the plan.
Shameful.
Does the Prime Minister accept she was wrong? And will she now do the right thing and honourable and reassure thousands of concerned EU nationals living in the UK today by unilaterally guaranteeing their rights? We created these circumstances. We should be showing leadership. We welcome the EU summit conclusions, especially those on jobs, growth and competitiveness. The SNP was the first government in the UK to publish a plan for Brexit. We put the single market at the heart of that, and we call again upon the Prime Minister to keep the UK in the single market to protect thousands of jobs in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Additional summit conclusions on the Paris Agreement are a very welcome step in ensuring the agreement is implemented following the US withdrawal last month. The Prime Minister must tell the House what the UK's next step will be in implementing the agreement in cooperation with our EU friends and neighbours. I welcome the announcement today of the uprating of pensions for those living in the EU, but will the Prime Minister extend that to pensioners living in other parts of the world that currently don't benefit from uprating? And finally, on behalf of these benches, I send best wishes to the Estonian President ahead of the European Estonian Presidency taking over on the 1st of July, and give thanks to the Maltese Presidency, which is coming to an end this week.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, may I join the honourable gentleman in passing condolences to the family and friends of Gordon Wilson, and I'm sorry to hear of his passing. Now, the honourable gentleman has raised a number of issues within the comments that he's made. Can I first of all reiterate the point about the process of application? He referred to the 85-page application paper. As I said in my statement, the Home Office is working to introduce a streamlined, light-touch approach on this, so people will not have to apply on an 85-page paper, such as the honourable gentleman has asked. He referred to the story in the Evening Standard. I have to say to him that is not my recollection, and what we're doing today well, but what we're doing today is setting out what I believe is a fair and serious offer to EU citizens staying here in the United Kingdom, but we do want to have a care, and I repeat the point I made to the Leader of the Opposition, have a care for those UK citizens who are living in the European Union. And I might just remind the honourable gentleman that during the Scottish independence referendum, the First Minister told EU nationals that if an independent Scotland wasn't allowed to rejoin the EU, they would lose the right to stay here. We're not saying that to EU nationals here in the United Kingdom. We're saying we want you to stay, and this paper is the basis on which we will ensure that you can stay and nobody will be forced to leave.
Mr. John Redwood.
I congratulate the Prime Minister on her policy, which will bring many benefits to the UK and the rest of the EU. Can she tell the House a little more about how far we can go in negotiating free trade agreements with non-EU countries before we leave, and when we will learn how we can spend all the money we're going to save?
Well, as my right honourable friend will know, one of the issues that we proposed during the election campaign was that some of the money that is returned is actually spent in a shared prosperity fund here in the United Kingdom, which will be looking to deal with and remove the disparities that occur within regions and within nations and between the parts of the United Kingdom. And as regards the trade deals for the rest of the world, of course, legally we can't sign up to free trade agreements with other parties until we are no longer members of the European Union, but there is much work that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, is doing with other countries around the world, such as India, such as America, to look to see what trade benefits we can achieve before we leave the European Union by removing some of the barriers that currently exist to trade between our countries.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that EU citizens living and working here are particularly concerned about the status of their children. Can she confirm that a young person who's lived in Britain for 4 years, of EU parents, who's currently studying at a university elsewhere in the EU and will be over the age of 18 when she returns, will be able automatically to return to her parents, and will her parents be required to meet an income threshold?
Yes, that individual would be allowed to return to the United Kingdom if the EU citizens are living here at the time at which we leave, if they're living here before the specified cut-off date and have 5 years residence, they get that their settled status. If they have less than 5 years residence before the cut-off date, then they will be able to stay to build up that 5 years residence for settled status. And of course, for anybody coming afresh to the new people coming to the United Kingdom after we leave the European Union, we will be setting out those immigration rules in due course, and there'll be a bill through Parliament which will enable the honourable gentleman to
Theresa Villiers.
Can I urge the Prime Minister to settle this issue as part of an interim deal with the EU, so those affected don't have to wait for the conclusions of the negotiations?
I thank my right honourable friend. I would very much like us to be able to do that by dealing with this at an early stage in the negotiations, and by recognising that I think what we all want to do is to ensure that we give people reassurance that they are no longer anxious about their future. I would hope that on both that the European Union would see the benefits of that, and that we'd be able to address this at an earlier stage necessarily than the end of the negotiations.
And Clwyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Prime Minister needs to reassure the members of the European Parliament. I was in Brussels last week and I heard petitioners from this country and other countries talk about their concerns. Now, previously, when I asked the Prime Minister would she address the European Parliament, she said she was waiting for an invitation. However, she must know she doesn't have to have an invitation. She can volunteer to address the plenary of the European Parliament. Will she do that?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I can just let her know that my Right Honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, will be meeting some MEPs, I think, later today to talk to them about the proposals that we have put forward. I have been in discussions with President Tajani, has indeed spoken to me about the possibility of my going over to the European Parliament and speaking to them, and we're looking at what basis that should be and what timetable.
John Whittingdale.
Does my right honourable friend agree that one of the principal reasons why the British people voted to leave the EU was to reassert the supremacy of this Parliament and of the UK courts? And can she confirm that when we do leave, that will be the position for all citizens resident in the UK, no matter from where they came?
Yes, I can confirm that to my right honourable friend. One of the key differences between the proposals we've put forward and those of the European Union is that they want the ECJ to continue to have jurisdiction on EU citizens even after we have left the European Union. I think people were very clear they did not want the ECJ to have jurisdiction here in the UK. I believe our courts are perfect. We have fine courts in this country. They will be able to uphold EU citizens' rights just as they uphold UK citizens' rights.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister did not answer the question from my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central. Yeah. If there are French parents whose daughter is studying in Paris and who is 19, and they have been living here for more than 5 years, will that daughter be able to return to live with them here without them having to pass the income threshold? And if those parents have been living here for less than 5 years, will they still have all the same rights as if they had been living here for more than 5 years?
Yes, if they have been living here for the 5 years, their daughter will be able to return to the United Kingdom on the same basis as that individual would today. So there would be no new rules that would apply. If they've been living here for less than 5 years, they'll be able to accrue that 5-year status so that they go to exactly the same position with that settled status.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The leader of the opposition alleged that there were many on this side who are coming over to Labour's way of thinking. Just in case I were to be tempted, Mr. Speaker, does anyone have any idea what that is?
I have to say, my honourable friend is always known for his plain speaking, and he has indeed done that and put the point in a rather plainer way than I did earlier in my response to the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Keith Vaz.
Mr. Speaker, at the summit, paragraph 6 of the conclusion refers to peace and stability in the world. Was there an opportunity to discuss the situation in Yemen, where 10,000 people have been killed, where the cholera epidemic has now reached 1/5 people, and where the Saudis and the Qataris are now refusing to speak to each other? Surely, if there was a role for the EU at this present time, it is to work with the United Kingdom that holds the pens on Yemen to try and bring peace to Yemen.
The right honourable gentleman raises a very serious issue in terms of the situation that exists in the Yemen, and this is a matter that has been of concern for some time and is a growing issue in terms of the humanitarian crisis in the Yemen. I'm pleased that the United Kingdom has been able to provide some support. Of course, there are issues about ensuring that support actually gets through to those people who need it in the Yemen. I will be open with him. There was not a discussion on the Yemen specifically at this European Union Council, but we will continue to work with other member states in the European Union and with our role on the Security Council of the United Nations to try to find a way through this solution so that we can see a reduction in the circumstances, the humanitarian problems that exist in the Yemen, and peace and stability in that country.
Mrs. Maria Miller.
Mr. Speaker. The status of EU citizens is something that I know the Prime Minister has been attempting to resolve since well before the triggering of Article 50. So what more can EU citizens who are residing in the UK be doing to make it clear to whoever is standing in the way of an agreement coming into place? What more pressure can they put on to resolve this issue, which is causing so much heartache to so many people?
My right honourable friend raises an interesting point. I think the message has to go across these negotiations that this is a really important issue. It's about people's futures, and that we want to ensure that we can remove anxiety and give people reassurance. When I speak to other leaders within Europe, that is the message that I get from them. But what we need to do is to ensure that the working group that has been set up under the negotiations recognises that and does its work as quickly as possible.
Tom Brake.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister accept that the only way to reassure the 3 million EU citizens who work in but are starting to leave our hospitals, schools, care homes and businesses, and the UK citizens in the EU, is for her to immediately and unconditionally grant full rights to EU citizens in the UK, no ifs, no buts? Anything less will leave them thinking they are nothing more than a bargaining chip in a crude and cruel game of call my bluff initiated by the Brexiteers sitting next to her.
We are making clear in the document that we have set out today the basis on which we believe a reciprocal arrangement can be put, but we're also making clear to people, EU citizens here in the UK, nobody is being asked to leave the United Kingdom. I think this is one of the most important messages we can give to people here, because there has been that anxiety. This is a serious offer, but nobody is being asked to leave the United Kingdom.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Speaker, I strongly welcome the offer to EU nationals that the Prime Minister is making today, and the spirit of generosity and pragmatism with which he is making the offer. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that carrying forward that same spirit to the negotiations about the rights of future EU workers gives us our best chance of protecting our own economic interests and securing that comprehensive trade deal that we all want to see?
I think my right honourable friend is right that what we want to do is to work forward in a spirit, in a positive spirit, a constructive spirit, because it is in the interests, I think, of both sides, of the UK and the European Union, to ensure that we get the right offer to citizens of our EU citizens here and UK citizens in the EU, but also that we get that trade deal, that comprehensive trade deal that we want, that will be not just to our benefit but that of the other member states as well.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I certainly want to see the dilemma that those EU nationals working here and living here are facing put to bed and put to rest so they can plan for their future. But I also know that my constituents who voted leave wanted to see reform of free movement. Can I ask the Prime Minister to pledge today to ensure that in the future more of my constituents will be trained to fulfil any vacancies that are created by reform of freedom movement in both the public and private sector? And if the answer to that is yes, will she commit to come back to this House to explain just how we're going to do that?
Well, can I thank the right honourable lady for the references that she's made, and I can give her the assurance. I think it is absolutely crucial in this country that we ensure that young people are given the skills, the training that they need to be able to take up the vacancies, the jobs, not just of today, but the jobs of the future. That's why we will be reforming technical education. We'll be introducing changes that ensure that we have proper technical education in this country for what I believe is the first time. And alongside that, we have an industrial strategy which is about spreading prosperity across this country and ensuring that those job opportunities are available.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, I commend the Prime Minister for the generous offer that she set out, which I hope will see an offer that will also benefit British citizens. And I'm also pleased, in answer to questions from opposite, she said that EU nationals will get the same rights as British citizens, but not better rights than British citizens. Can I also ask her, is she going to take the opportunity to make sure that EU nationals who sadly have come to this country and abused our hospitality by committing crimes, she will use the full opportunity of this to make sure they can be removed from our country?
Well, my right honourable friend, with one of his previous roles, knows very well about the issue of those who have come to this country and abused the rights that they have been given by their criminality, and I certainly will ensure that those who are serious and persistent criminals, that we can take action to remove them from the UK.
Pat McFadden.
Speaker, given that EU citizens are living and working here legally at the moment, on the matter of the cut-off date, how can this be earlier than the date that we leave the European Union, given that the rights and obligations we have as members continue up until the date that we leave, even through the Article 50
negotiation process.
It is different. This is the rights that we've set out here, and the question of the specified date is about the point at which people are able to qualify for settled status here in the United Kingdom. Of course, as we are members of the European Union, then the arrangements which have always existed for us as members of the European Union, those here, will continue. But for those who are getting settled status and wish to retain settled status for the future, that is where the cut-off date is pertinent, and that will be a matter for negotiation.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister chose exceptionally to raise this extremely important issue in the Council. But in the future conduct of the negotiations, will she confirm that all the threads will pass through the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union in bringing the negotiation together in the same way that the European Council are standing behind Mr. Barnier?
Very happy. I'm not sure my right honourable friend is looking at all those threads that he's going to pull together. We're very clear that, of course, as we go through these negotiations, at different stages, in the working groups and so forth, a whole variety of people will be involved in those. But as has already happened last Monday, when it was my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the EU, who went to the start of the negotiations opposite Michel Barnier, I think it's very clear the status and the position that he holds.
Ben Bradshaw.
She doesn't seem to understand that the election has changed everything and that her extreme damaging Brexit is dead. So why is she making an offer that, both as it affects British nationals living on the continent and EU nationals here, is far less generous than the offer they made to us just 2 weeks ago?
No, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, there is no extreme Brexit that we've been talking about. There is no hard Brexit and there's no soft Brexit. What we want is the right deal for the United Kingdom. And I remind the right honourable gentleman that over 80% of people who voted in the recent election voted for parties that were committed to taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union. Over 80% voted for parties that were committed to taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union. We've made a fair and serious offer. I believe it is a generous offer. There is one way in which it is different from the offer that the European Union has put, and that is about the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And when people voted in the referendum last year, they voted to ensure that we stopped the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in the UK.
Mr. Bernard Jenkins.
May I congratulate my right honourable friend on the very comprehensive offer she has made to secure the rights of EU citizens in our own country, in a bid also to secure the rights of UK citizens in the EU. The next time she meets the heads of government in the European Union, can she explain to them that there are rather a lot of people, Remainers in this country, who would prefer Mr Corbyn, the honourable leader of the opposition, to become Prime Minister, but who will, he says, scrap our nuclear weapons within 6 months, removing part of Europe's vital defensive shield provided through NATO. Will she make clear the danger of that to them?
Very tangentially related to the matters upon which the Prime Minister is reporting to us, but we're grateful to the honourable gentleman for what I think I'll charitably call a cerebral meander. The Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, the European Council did touch on defence issues as well. So it is possible for me to report to my honourable friend that I did indeed touch on the importance of the United Kingdom continuing to maintain its defence relationship with other countries in Europe. Our relationship through NATO is very important. We are one of the, obviously, because of our nuclear deterrent, we're one of the key safeguards of the security and safety of Europe.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister keeps talking about the need for reciprocity. So can she tell the House why she chose not to simply reciprocate the genuinely fair and generous proposal of the EU Commission back in April that would have guaranteed the existing rights of the 1.2 million UK citizens living elsewhere in the EU. It would have saved a lot of time, it would have built up goodwill instead of ill will, and it would have got the negotiations off to a much better start.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I think I had pointed out there are some differences between the two proposals that have been put forward by us and the European Union through the European Commission. One of the key ones was was the suggestion from the European Commission that after we've left the European Union, there should be two classes of citizen here in the UK. UK citizens whose rights would be guaranteed by the UK courts, and EU citizens whose rights would be guaranteed by the European Court of Justice. I don't believe that's right. I believe all citizens should have their rights guaranteed through our courts.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no reasonable person could oppose what she has proposed? The only people who do never wanted us to leave in the first place. And the idea that a foreign court should rule on the rights of people living here is akin to the outdated colonial approach taken towards China in the unequal treaties of the 19th century.
Well, I always bow to my honourable friend's historical knowledge and references that he makes, but I think the point is a clear one, which is that what we want to see when we leave the European Union is that citizens here in the UK have their rights guaranteed by UK courts and enforced by UK courts.
The honourable gentleman was present himself at the signing of the said treaties. We don't know. We'll leave it to speculation. Bambos charalambos.
Did the Prime Minister have an opportunity to speak with the President of Cyprus and express her support for the settlement talks between the Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaders due to recommence in Switzerland on Wednesday?
Yes, I welcome the honourable gentleman to his place in this House. And can I say to him, I did indeed. I had a bilateral discussion with the President of Cyprus about those talks and about our hope and expectation, because they have come so far. I think President Anastasiades and Mr Akunci have both taken the discussions to a point that is far closer to us seeing a resolution than we've ever seen before, and I hope that we're able to take it over the line in the talks that will start in Geneva later this month, and the UK, as a co-guarantor, stands ready to play its part in doing that.
Shailesh Vara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When EU leaders say that they want EU laws to prevail over their citizens in the UK, what they're effectively saying is that they don't trust our judicial system. When the Prime Minister next meets with her EU counterparts, may I suggest that she gently reminds them that many of the companies in their own countries, companies that drive their economies, actually use English and Welsh contract law, which is to be enforced in our courts by our judges. And the reason why they use English and Welsh law is because globally our judicial system commands greater respect than the judicial systems of Germany, France, Italy and so on.
My honourable friend has made an extremely good point, and at the nub of it is this, that our courts are respected around the world. And as he says, people choose to use our law because they respect it and they respect our courts, and they also respect the validity of our law. And I think it's important that citizens in the UK are under the jurisdiction of our courts.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I note that the Prime Minister intends to do away with the technical requirement for comprehensive sickness insurance once a reciprocal arrangement has been reached. But constituents like my Lithuanian constituent, Dementa Macduff, are suffering as a result of this requirement at present, because despite being in Scotland for more than 5 years, she can't get permanent residency because she doesn't have comprehensive sickness insurance. And we heard evidence on the EU Select Committee in the last Parliament that no such insurance product actually exists. So will the Prime Minister do away with that requirement here and now, because it's a technical nonsense, because these people are using the NHS anyway?
I have to say to the honourable lady, that requirement for comprehensive sickness insurance is an EU requirement. As long as we are members of the EU, it will continue to be there. Once we leave, we can indeed remove it.
James Cleverly.
I welcome the government's commitment to maintain the anything but arms free trade relationship with the least developed countries. Could she speak a little bit more about the government's intention to extend free and fair trade with developing countries who are not necessarily on the least developed countries list, but who have historically been penalised by the EU's tariff arrangements?
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that we are looking for a wide range of trade deals with countries around the world when we leave the European Union, and I think those trade deals are important because they bring prosperity, growth and jobs here to the UK, but also because it is free trade that has lifted millions out of poverty around the world. And for not just the least developed countries, but for others, actually there are huge advantages to them and their citizens for ensuring those free trade deals are in place so that we can see growth and jobs and prosperity spread more widely than it is today.
Mrs. Louise Ellman.
Could the Prime Minister tell us what discussions took place on cooperation against terrorism? And was there any reference to what happened on the streets of London just over a week ago on Al-Quds Day, when demonstrators were allowed to shout out blaming Zionists for the Grenfell Tower fire and castigating rabbis and synagogues?
Well, I can say to the Honourable Lady that there was indeed a significant discussion on the issue of counter-terrorism and the need for us to cooperate together in dealing with that issue. We focus particularly, as I said in my statement, on issues around the internet, on the way in which the internet is used to promulgate hateful propaganda, but also for the terrorists to be able to plan on the internet and have a safe space. We are united in our wish and indeed our determination to ensure that we take action with the tech companies to ensure that this cannot happen in the future. And on the last point that the Honourable Lady raises, I would simply say this. I think across the whole of this House we are clear that there is no place for hate crime or hate speech in this country.
Andrew Bridgen.
Speaker, 3.2 million EU citizens currently choose to live, work and make their lives in our country. They are well aware that we're leaving the European Union. What does my right honourable friend believe this says about their perception of the future prospects of our country post-Brexit? And what does it say about many of the members opposite, that millions of EU citizens have more confidence in our country going forward than they do?
Well, I say to my honourable friend, I think what that shows is what a great place the United Kingdom is to live and work, what great opportunities we have for the future. And I'm very pleased that those 3.2 million EU citizens have confidence in our country and want to stay here.
Stephen Twigg.
In her statement, the Prime Minister talked about the drivers of migration, which include climate change, conflict and extreme poverty. As a country, we have a very proud record on international development. Does she agree with me that it's vitally important, as this process moves forward, that we continue to cooperate very closely with the European Union and other European countries to tackle extreme poverty, especially in Africa?
Yes, indeed it is, and I'm pleased that we as a country have been able to play our part in dealing with that. Just as an example, the Somalia conference that we brought forward, that we hosted some weeks ago, brought countries from around the world to find ways in which we can continue to support Somalia, which has been a country which has been a source of people choosing to leave to try to come to Europe, to present a greater stability in that country, but also greater economic opportunity. And the UK has been at the forefront, for example, with the compact we have with Ethiopia, in providing economic jobs opportunities for people who otherwise might be trying to migrate to Europe. And we'll continue to work with our European allies on this.
Andrew Salou.
Does the Prime Minister believe that our new relationship with Europe will enable us to reduce further the significant numbers of European Union nationals in our prisons? Of course, this would give further headroom for our hard-pressed prison officers to do the vital rehabilitation work which they do so well.
Yes, well, indeed, we want to ensure that we are able to continue to transfer prisoners from the United Kingdom to their home states in the European Union, but we also want to ensure, and will do, that we are able to remove serious and persistent criminals from the United Kingdom.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could ask the right honourable and even closer friend, the Prime Minister, what reassurance the Prime Minister can give to the agri-food sector in Northern Ireland, its producers and processors in particular, about the rights of workers that will be required to benefit from the increase in trade that Northern Ireland agri-food sector will undoubtedly get as a result of Brexit. Will this be marshalled by way of a work permit system, and if so, will that be capped in Northern Ireland?
Make sure that cheque doesn't bounce.
The rules that we are going to set for people coming into the United Kingdom from the European Union once we've left the European Union, so people who aren't here already, will of course be set out in the new immigration bill that we will be bringing to the House following the repeal bill. But I fully recognise the importance of the agri-food sector in Northern Ireland. That was clear to me on several visits I've made to Northern Ireland in recent months, and we want to ensure not just that actually in Northern Ireland but across the whole of the United Kingdom that we see, once we've left the European Union, greater opportunities for our agri-food sector, which will bring jobs and greater growth and prosperity.
Mr. William Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that the typically warm and constructive response from Mr Juncker to these welcome proposals reinforces the need for her to work ever closer with European heads of governments to compensate for the vested interests of the EU institutions?
Well, as I said in my statement, the responses that I had from individual leaders in the European Union was positive to the proposals that we were putting forward, and I can just cite, for example, the Prime Minister of Poland in her positive response to what was said, and I think my honourable friends made an interesting point.
Shukura. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To follow the member for North Antrim, the Prime Minister's new governing partners, the Democratic Unionist Party, in their manifesto said they would seek to deliver, and I quote, a frictionless border with the Republic of Ireland and a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union. Is it not the case that neither of these objectives can be secured if we leave the European Union without a deal?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman that the requirement, the desire to bring about a frictionless border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and the desire to have that comprehensive free trade deal is exactly what the government is pursuing. It's what we've said in the Lancaster House deal, and we're doing it. I met the new incoming Taoiseach last week and discussed with him how we can work with the Irish government to ensure we deliver just that.
Nusrat Ghani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Violent ideologies from far right to Islamists are increasingly online. Can my right honourable friend provide some more information as to what was agreed at the Council in tackling, fining or holding accountable internet companies that carry extremist content or those that are platforms for grooming?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and I think what we see with extremism, which leads to terrorism on whatever the source of it is that people are trying to divide us in this country, and I think that is why the response that we have had to all the terrorist attacks that have taken place in recent months, there being different reasons for those terrorist attacks having taken place, of course, what the response of unity and unity of purpose of the British citizens to actually ensure that we drive out this hatred from our country is so important. We focused in the discussions on the aspect of the internet, and in particular on the industry-led forum, which we and others have been discussing with tech companies to be set up. We want to see automatic technological solutions to removing material from the internet, because at the moment the process of removing that material, that extremist material, is too slow and it allows too many minds to be infiltrated before it's taken down. So we want to see automatic removal of that material.
Mike Gapes.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has made clear her hostility to the European Court of Justice. What is going to happen to British citizens living in other EU countries if they are not protected by the European Court of Justice? Will they become citizens of nowhere?
What I've made clear is that, as regards the jurisdiction of courts in the United Kingdom, I believe we should not be subject to the European Court of Justice, that EU citizens' rights here should be protected in a different way, and I believe when people voted to leave the European Union, one of the things they voted for was for the ECJ not to have jurisdiction here in the United Kingdom.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole country will welcome the agreement that the Conservative and Unionist Party has done with the DUP. And the Prime Minister, in a statement, sir, referred to the Brexit dividend of over £10 billion that we will save when we're not in the European superstate. And I welcome the £500 million a year going to Northern Ireland. Is that sort of the funding that the Prime Minister thinks will happen in the rest of the United Kingdom?
What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that we do have to look at how we are going to use money that we will no longer be sending to the European Union. People voted for us not to be sending vast sums of money every year to the EU. We will have to look at how we use that. And one of the aspects that we have already proposed here on this side of the House is this concept of a shared prosperity fund, which will be removing disparities between different parts of the UK.
Mr Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Did the Prime Minister have a chance to discuss transitional funding arrangements for Wales at the European Council? Because surely she's going to have something to say to the people of Wales, who now feel like they're being treated like second-class citizens in the United Kingdom, when she can magic up billions for Northern Ireland and yet won't give a guarantee for Wales on future funding.
We've already been very clear on various aspects of funding from the European Union in relation to funding for farmers and the guarantees that we've given over a period of years for that. But we want to make sure that when we have money that comes back from the European, that we're no longer giving to the European Union, that we are able to spend that money in a way that is as effective as possible in driving improvements here across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Hugh Merriman.
Mr Speaker, before coming to this place, I used to teach effective negotiation skills. Through the Prime Minister, could I invite the Leader of the Opposition to a free trial period?
Well, can I say that I think that was the most generous offer from my honourable friend. I suspect, though, the first thing he's going to have to do is explain to the Leader of the Opposition what a negotiation actually is.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I continue the efforts of my colleague from Pontefract, my colleague from Leeds Central, in trying to understand what this will mean for our EU constituents resident here in the UK and their family members? Can the Prime Minister confirm that under her rules, this means a Polish nurse who is on a Band 5 salary of under £22,000 and therefore will not meet the threshold of income required under the current rules will not be able to bring her child and partner over to the UK, or a teaching assistant, a French teaching assistant on under £17,000 will not be able to bring an elderly relative to the UK under these rules? And if so, what impact does she think this will have on our public services?
Can I say what I have said earlier? For those EU citizens who are here who qualify for the settled status, either they have 5 years residence already and can qualify for settled status, or they are here before the cut-off date and are able to build up that qualification for settled status, there will be no extra requirements in terms of them bringing family members into the United Kingdom. We are not going to be splitting up those families.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I welcome the Prime Minister's very clear assurances that in Brexit there will be no family split-ups and that they will be able to have no cliff edges so they can regularise their status, and also the healthcare and the pension arrangements. But the impact of Brexit on British businesses who employ EU workers simply cannot be underestimated, especially in places like Taunton Deane, the food, the drink, the farming industries and health. So what reassurances can the Prime Minister give British businesses who employ EU citizens?
Can I, first of all, re-emphasise the point that my honourable friend has made, that there will be no cliff edges and people will be able to bring family members here. We're not talking about splitting up families. I think this is a very important message. When we look at, once we've left the European Union, we will, of course, be putting immigration rules in place, but as we do for people who come here already from outside the European Union, we will, in putting those rules in place, we will recognise the need to ensure that our economy can have access to the skills that it needs, particularly in shortage occupations. But we also want to ensure that people here in the United Kingdom are trained to take those jobs. Hence, I think the very important moves the government is making on technical education.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister said earlier that no families will be split up, but she said during the general election campaign that she is intending to cut net migration to this country to the tens of thousands. Well, there's a problem here, because last year 136,787 people came to this country through the family route. So if she's going to meet her pledge, she is going to split families up, isn't she?
Let's be very clear about what I'm saying about EU citizens who qualify for settled status. They will be able to bring family members here into the United Kingdom without any extra requirements.
Robert Courts. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement that Britain will be becoming more internationalist after we leave the European Union. Could she give some further details of the statements that her government has had, the discussions with non-EU countries, with that prospect in mind?
Well, I'm very happy to say to my honourable friend that we've already had a number of productive engagements on the issue of trade for the future with countries around the world, notably with India, with America, but with other countries too, like Australia and New Zealand, discussions with China and other countries around the world. I think there are real opportunities for the UK once we leave the European Union, and we will be making every effort to ensure that we take those opportunities.
Liam Byrne.
The Prime Minister's offer is a step in the right direction, but it is long overdue. But she will know as a former Home Secretary that it is impossible to grant the rights she proposes to 3.2 million EU citizens and fulfil her target to reduce net migration to tens of thousands. So can she confirm for the House today that she has set aside this fanciful target and is going to propose instead to follow the Chancellor's advice of a Brexit that is rich in jobs?
We all want to ensure that the deal that we come to with the European Union is going to ensure we have the comprehensive free trade agreement that will indeed ensure that we see growth and prosperity and jobs here in the United Kingdom. That is the aim, but also we will be able to see jobs being brought here to the United Kingdom as a result of the trade arrangements we'll be making around the rest of the world.
Craig McKinley.
Speaker, may I pay a tribute to the Prime Minister for confirming once more the fulfilment of this side of the House to deliver that referendum result of control of our laws, borders and money. Would my right honourable friend give due assurance that any pressure to allow the European Court of Justice any role in immigration or future ILR status of EU citizens within this country will be flatly opposed?
My honourable friend, the assurance, as I've said earlier, that I believe that in terms of assuring the rights of EU citizens living here in the United Kingdom, we believe that should be done through our courts and not through the European Court of Justice. And I will just reiterate the point I made earlier. I think when many people voted to leave the European Union, one of the things they wanted to ensure was that the ECJ no longer had jurisdiction here in the UK.
Mr Barry Shearman.
Many of us who did not want this country of ours to leave the European Union did so partly because we believe it would make us more vulnerable and Europe less stable. Could you assure me that there were discussions at the European Council of the security implications of where we are now in Europe, given the increasing threat from Russia, both in terms of military and defence, but also in terms of other activities they seem to be getting up to these days?
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that there were discussions, there were a particular set of discussions which related to the activities of Russia and the EU's response to that, and the United Kingdom has been one of the countries leading the requirements in relation to that. Of course, we remain clear that the sanctions must stay until the Minsk agreement is fully implemented in relation to what activity Russia has undertaken in the Ukraine. We also discussed other security and defence issues, and I was able to reassure the other heads of state and government that the United Kingdom will retain its role in helping to ensure the security and safety of the European Union. We want to continue to have a defence and security partnership with our European allies.
Tim Lawton.
Mr Speaker, can I return to the Prime Minister's welcome comments about the discussions on social media companies hosting hate material? We have led the way in this country on requiring employers proactively to make checks on the legality of prospective employers, for landlords to check on prospective tenants and for banks to check on money laundering. No such requirements or fines are in place for social media companies. So can she now set down urgently a timeline, minimum requirements and the very real prospect of significant and meaningful fines for those social media companies who continue to act irresponsibly?
Well, My honourable friend makes a very important point, and it is precisely because we want to see those companies acting with greater responsibility in this area that we have been discussing with them this industry-led forum for automatic takedown of material from the internet, and that we have galvanised support not just in the G7, as I did earlier this month, but also in the EU Council last Friday, international support for ensuring that we can put collective pressure on the companies to ensure that they are not carrying this material, and that we do see the importance and the significance of taking this action. And we have also discussed that whereas the first step will be discussions with the companies on what they can do themselves, we have also discussed the prospect of legislation if that fails.
Darren Jones. He was here a moment ago. Mr. David Hanson.
Could the Prime Minister assure the House that she's made progress on securing our membership of the European Arrest Warrant, Eurojust and Europol as part of her discussions? And in passing, could she also tell me that the UK government does know when European citizens enter the United Kingdom?
Well, as regards the Eurojust and Europol and the European Arrest Warrant, those will be matters for the negotiations. But I've been very clear that we want to retain our security cooperation, not just on counter-terrorism matters, but also on matters relating to crime.
Wendy Morton.
Mr. Speaker, when we triggered Article 50, it was very clear that a new immigration regime would be required. Does my right honourable friend agree that it was therefore entirely sensible and appropriate to discuss the cut-off date with the EU Commission?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. We will be seeing new immigration rules, as she says, being brought into the UK for those people who are moving from the EU into the UK after we have left, and is entirely right and sensible in part of the negotiations to discuss the cut-off date for EU citizens who are here.
Meg Hillier.
I represent many EU citizens who are fearful and indeed tearful about their future prospects, so I welcome some of the clarity the Prime Minister has brought to the matter. She talks about a streamlined system for applying for status, but many of them worry about how they're going to pay the costs for an entire family to go through this process in short order. Can she give us an indication of what those costs might be so that she can reassure them?
The Home Office will be looking very carefully at ensuring that the costs are reasonable in this, and they want to ensure that the streamlined process will be a light-touch process, will be easy for people to access, and therefore easy for people to be able to regularise their status.
Mr. Kevin Hollin-Rake.
Mr. Speaker, it is very important to our economy that business continues to invest and that there are no cliff-edge changes to our trading relationships. As well as seeking a fair deal on exit, as well as a new trade deal, would the Prime Minister seek a 2 or 3 year transitional period to give business a total of up to 5 years to prepare for the future?
I think it is important that once we know what the basis of the future relationship with the EU will be, that we recognise that not just business, but actually government as well, may need to have a period, an implementation period, when they're able to make the adjustments that are necessary. How long that period will be will depend, of course, on what the new relationship is going to be, and therefore that will be part of the discussions that take place during the negotiations.
Linden.
Mr. Speaker, with tens of thousands of Scottish jobs at risk, will the Prime Minister listen to our Chancellor's warnings and protect our place in the single market?
As regards Scottish jobs, I have to say the most important single market is that of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Was the Prime Minister able to convey to her European counterparts in the Council that 589 members of this House elected in the general election earlier this month did so on a promise to deliver a comprehensive Brexit?
Yes, I was very clear that the view of the electorate, the view of the government, the view of the majority, the position that was taken at the election on the majority of people who have come into this House was precisely that we want to deliver on the will of the British people as expressed in the referendum.
Ian Murray.
The Prime Minister said at the beginning of her statement that she wished for the UK and the EU to trade as freely as possible in both goods and services. So can she confirm to the House, if any time was spent at all, developing any proposals for the UK to remain both in the single market and the customs union?
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman that what we want to do is to ensure that we have that good, frictionless and as tariff-free as possible access to the single market. That's the way, that's what we're talking about when we talk about a comprehensive free trade agreement. That comprehensive free trade agreement will be part of the negotiations.
Mr. Richard Graham.
European Union citizens in my constituency of Gloucester and their employers, notably the NHS, our university and many businesses, will greatly appreciate the clarity in the Prime Minister's statement today. Could my right honourable friend give an idea of whether she believes an agreement on this crucial issue to so many citizens here and so many British citizens in Europe might be possible before agreement on other issues, and if so, when?
I'm pleased that this issue is one of the first issues that is going to be addressed in the negotiations. I hope and I believe there is goodwill on both sides to recognise the importance of this issue for citizens both here and in the remaining 27 European Union member states. I can't put a timeline on that because obviously there are aspects of this that still have to be negotiated, and the European Union has said that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But I would hope that we'll be able to give final reassurance to citizens at an earlier stage.
Diana Johnson.
Speaker, the Prime Minister said, and I'm sure we'd all agree, that she wants to see the removal of serious and persistent criminals from the UK. Can she just say a little bit more about how she intends to do that, bearing in mind that she failed to do it in the 7 years or 6 years she was a Home Secretary?
I have to say to the honourable lady that her portrayal of what happened during the time that I was Home Secretary, and indeed since, is not correct. A significant number of persistent and serious criminals were removed from the United Kingdom. The basis on which it is possible to do that for people who are here as European Union citizens, of course, is subject to slightly different rules than for others, and once we're out of the European Union, we'll be able to adjust that.
Matt Warman.
My constituency has proportionally more EU nationals than any other in the country compared to how recently they have arrived. I know they and I will warmly welcome this statement, which provides real clarity and I hope will be concluded, as she has said earlier, than the end of this deal. But on the issue of social media, can I remind the Prime Minister that it wasn't that long ago that internet companies were saying that the removal of child sex abuse images automatically was simply impossible. Now it happens routinely. Extremist material is harder, but does she agree with me that it can be done?
My honourable friend has made a very important point in drawing that comparison. It did take a while and hard work to get the tech companies to the position where they would take the action they have done on child sexual abuse images on the internet. I believe we can do the same with extremism, and that's what we're encouraging them to do.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Hello, Prime Minister. With your statement and at the Council, did you manage to raise the issue of the Erasmus Plus programme and our continuing work in that? And particularly, we have the deadline for the Erasmus Plus grants is in October. 6 months it takes for those grants to be awarded, and another year sometimes for them to be enacted. And will the Prime Minister ensure that any academic, student or young person that is awarded an Erasmus programme is able to come here without additional visa burdens?
First of all, I would point out that while we are still within the European Union, then the current arrangements and the opportunities to apply still apply to the United Kingdom. We have been able to give some certainty in terms of certain programmes to the continuation of those programmes after we leave the European Union, but I think even after we've left the European Union there will be options for us to find ways in which we can contribute and can participate in such programmes.
We all warmly welcome the honourable gentleman for Brighton Kemp Town to the Chamber and to our deliberations. Michael Tomlinson.
Returned from the Netherlands with a delegation from the Lords and Commons. Mr. Speaker, it's the Dutch Binnenhof tour, where, amongst other things, I had the opportunity to speak to British nationals living and working in the Netherlands. What reassurance can the Prime Minister give to them and to other British nationals living and working across the EU that their rights will be protected alongside EU rights living here?
Good question. I think that the best assurance I can give to those British citizens living in the Netherlands and elsewhere in the European Union is that we have set out a fair deal, a fair offer to those EU citizens living here, but we are very clear that this must be reciprocal and that those British citizens must have their rights protected as well, and we will continue to argue for that.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister mentioned the trade deal with Japan and the EU, and she would be aware from leaked documents this weekend that a lot of people are very concerned that there's no mention of environmental protections, for example, tackling Japan's illegal timber trade or whaling in that draft agreement. Does she think those protections should be in there, and what does it say about the agreements that we would negotiate in when we leave the EU?
Obviously, there is still further discussion taking place between the European Union and Japan in relation to that trade deal. Once we've left the European Union and are able to set up these agreements ourselves, and Japan is one of the countries, another one of the countries that we have been talking to, then it will be up to us, as part of those negotiations for that trade deal, to set the conditions for that trade agreement.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Returning to the issue of online content, will the Prime Minister confirm whether the British Government would be willing to enact legislation itself should the internet companies themselves not make sufficient progress with the removal of inappropriate content?
We are certainly willing to consider legislation on this matter. This is so important. I believe that with the international pressure that we are now building and the cooperation internationally we're now building, then we will be able to put pressure on the tech companies such that they do this themselves. But I think we should not rule any option out.
Patrick Grady.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it's in order to blow a raspberry in this House, but that was the reaction of constituents, EU nationals, that I met at the Partick Language Hub in my constituency on Saturday when they heard about the reports of this deal. I just wonder how many EU nationals the Prime Minister has met or consulted with in drawing up the proposal she's presented today.
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, like other members of this House, I have met people in my constituency who are employers of EU nationals concerned about it, people who are EU nationals who are concerned about their position, and I suggest that what he actually does, because of course the detail had not been published at the weekend, that he actually takes the detail of this to his constituents and enables them to see for themselves the fair and serious offer that we're making.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister refer to the manifesto commitment to create a UK shared prosperity fund earlier in this session. So, even though it wasn't specifically mentioned in the Queen's speech, could the Prime Minister confirm that this government is committed to bring forward such a fund to replace EU structural funding that's been so important to places like Cornwall?
We do want to ensure that when we are in a position that we're no longer sending these huge sums of money every year to the European Union, that the money that is available, some of that money that is available, can be used in this way. I think there is a very real issue about ensuring that we do that in a way that is as effective as possible and is going to have the maximum impact across all parts of the United Kingdom.
Daniel Zeichner.
I'm sure the Prime Minister will be aware of the problems already being faced by our universities and research sectors because of the uncertainty around these issues. Could you tell us what discussions she had at the Council with other leaders about dealing with these challenges? And could you take the opportunity today to say whether she wants us to stay within the Horizon 2020 programme in future? Good question. Very good.
There are a number of these programmes and projects that the United Kingdom has been part of and that we have benefited from, that will be part of the negotiations as we go through. What I'm very clear about at the moment, and a point that we have made consistently within EU circles, is to ensure that as long as we are still in the European Union, then we should have the same ability to apply for programmes, to be part of these, as has been the case previously. And one of the areas of concern I have is that in some areas, such as university research, there are some, certainly I'm hearing some anecdotes that universities are finding it harder because of our future. What I would say is that as long as we're in the European Union, then we are able to apply on exactly the same basis as we always have been.
What a rich assortment of distinction. Joan Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The European arrest warrant has proved a very effective extradition order, means by which we see speedy justice for those who have committed crime and for the victims who want to see a speedy outcome. What does the Prime Minister envisage as the future of the European arrest warrant? Has she discussed it at any point yet? And if not, when does she think it will be discussed?
The Honourable Lady, that those issues, as I indicated to her right honourable friend earlier, will be part of the negotiations. But I'm also, I think, bound to point out that I have stood at this dispatch box as a Home Secretary and argued for the United Kingdom remaining in the European arrest warrant during a debate when the Labour Party was trying to stop us from getting the legislation through.
Alison Thewley. This chuntering from a sedentary position, and it's true, it's not true, it's all very well, but it's rather unfair on the Honourable Lady, who wishes to unburden herself of a series of important thoughts which the nation should hear. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every week at my surgery, I see constituents who are already worn down by the incompetence, the intransigence and the unkindness of the Home Office. What steps is the Prime Minister going to put in place to give the Home Office adequate funding to deal with all these additional EU nationals who will now need to be processed?
Excellent question. The Home Office is well able to deal with the issues that it will be addressing, and it will be ensuring, as I said earlier in response to her honourable friend, that the process which people will go through will be streamlined and light touch.
Nick Thomas Simmons.
Mr. Speaker, I recently visited a manufacturer in my constituency that exports into the EU, who informed me that they now have to include the risks of Brexit in their export contracts. What advice does the Prime Minister have for manufacturers like those in my constituency who have to today assess the risk they may end up paying tariffs when we leave the EU?
To those manufacturers is that I hope they will work with us as the government to ensure that we understand the needs of every part of industry in this country as we go forward into the negotiation on the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. We want to see a tariff-free ability to trade with the European Union, and we will be considering the views and interests of British industry as we do that.
Angela Smith.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has twice this afternoon responded to questions about the skills challenges that will be created as a result of the reform of the freedom of movement by referring to the reform of technical education. But of course the economy will have much greater needs: new dentists, new doctors, vets and other professionals. So on that basis, will she guarantee the funding necessary to ensure that our schools, colleges and universities will be able to meet the skills challenges of a post-Brexit world?
Not just in Northern Ireland. I've been very clear that we do need to meet those skills challenges. That's why we are bringing in the reforms that we are doing. And I have to say to the Honourable Lady, she refers to issues within the National Health Service. Of course, one of the important steps that this government has taken is to remove the caps on numbers of people who can train as staff within the National Health Service.
Annalisa Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question relates to that posed by my friend from Cambridge. I'd like to ask why, if the Prime Minister truly is concerned about the future of British science and European funding, there's no mention of British science and European funding in either this statement, nor in any of the Brexit bills, nor in the Queen's speech.
Can I suggest that the Honourable Lady looks at the 12 objectives that we set out in my Lancaster House speech in January for our negotiated deal with the European Union, when we specifically referred to science and innovation?
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, much play has been made this afternoon about the supremacy of this place in terms of the repatriation of powers from the European Union. Yet there's been no consideration made about how the whole governance and structure of the United Kingdom is to be developed post-Brexit. Will the government give any consideration to a concurrent constitutional convention that will consider how stable and sustainable governance and distribution of power across the United Kingdom is considered after the Brexit process, including a federal UK? Thank you.
I apologise. I welcome the honourable gentleman to his place. I think there are one or two other honourable members who are new to the House who have stood up that I haven't welcomed, so I apologise to them for that. But can I just say to the honourable gentleman that I think the best way of ensuring good governance and stability across the United Kingdom is maintaining the United Kingdom.
Yes, I too welcome the honourable member for Glasgow North East. He's just served up a very, very interesting hors d'oeuvre, and we look forward to his main course before very long. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In York, we have two excellent universities, but they're already challenged by the recruitment and retention of EU staff. Researchers and academics need to move seamlessly between UK and EU universities. So how will they accrue their settled status under her new rules?
I have to say, I suggest that the Honourable Lady looks at the proposals that we've set out today, which make it clear the basis on which people are able to get their guaranteed settled status here in the United Kingdom, and that will cover people from all walks of life. We want people to stay, EU citizens who are here, we want them to stay. We're not talking about forcing anybody to leave the United Kingdom.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has fielded, without really answering, a number of questions about the longer-term rights of EU nationals to bring their family over here should the need arise in the future. Can she now answer the question categorically? Will she give an absolute guarantee that the minimum income requirement that is obstructing so many family reunions for non-EU nationals, that requirement will never, under any circumstances, be imposed on any EU national in the United Kingdom?
Well, EU nationals who have been here for 5 years, who have the 5 years residence, will qualify for settled status. EU nationals who have been here for less than 5 years will be given an opportunity to qualify for that settled status, i.e. to stay for those 5 years to qualify for that settled status. Those EU nationals will not have any extra requirements imposed on them in relation to bringing family members here into the United Kingdom. Once we have left the United Kingdom, then we will be establishing within the immigration rules the arrangements for EU nationals who then move into the United Kingdom, who will be in the same status as those who are moving from outside of the European Union.
Susan Ellen Joe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As part of her recent little tour around Labour-held seats across the country, the Prime Minister stopped for a photograph in a farm in my constituency.
The majority went up.
Why? Why was there no mention of agriculture in today's statement?
Absolutely.
I have to say to the honourable lady, what I was reporting on were the subjects that were discussed at the European Council on Friday, and I reported faithfully on those subjects.
Mr. Clyde Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that she was aware of the details that are contained in that document on EU nationals what to remain in the UK at the time during the general election when she promised to cut immigration to the tens of thousands? And are the two compatible with one another?
Yes. What we are talking about in this document is about the rights of EU citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom. We are making a fair and serious offer that nobody will be forced to leave the United Kingdom, that the families will not be split up. We want people to stay, and this is a document that will enable them to.
Order. Thank you. Statement. The First Secretary of State and Minister for the Cabinet Office, Minister Damian Green.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.